in your ear. The president is moving. Your eyes don't follow him. They never do. They go to the crowd, to the thousand small details that don't belong. The man whose jaw is set too tight for a celebration. The woman whose hands haven't come out of her pockets once in the last 4 minutes. The person at the back of the rope line who isn't watching the president at all. They are looking at you. You've been doing this for 7 years. And in 7 years, you've learned one thing above everything else. The moment you feel safe is the moment you've already failed. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the Secret Service. Your first years have nothing to do with the president. You start in a field office, chase counterfeit bills. You build financial fraud cases, spend months learning how to identify a fake 20 by the feel of the paper, by the way the ink sits, by the small imperfections that forgers can never quite eliminate. It's painstaking, methodical work, and it is the foundation of everything that comes after. Because what this job actually demands, more than courage or strength, is the ability to notice what's wrong before anyone else does. You went undercover in your third year, wire under your shirt, buying counterfeit currency from a network that ran from Detroit to Miami. Men who would not have hesitated to kill you if they'd known who you actually were. You made the cases. You got the commendations. You kept your name clean on every file because you understood even then that this career is built on a record and records follow you. When the window opened to apply for protective operations, you'd been waiting for it for 2 years. The selection panel was 5 agents who between them had covered every administration from Reagan through Obama. They didn't ask whether you were brave. They didn't ask whether you could shoot. They asked you one question. Why do you want to stand between a target and the people who want them dead? You gave them the honest answer, not the patriotic one, not the speech you'd rehearsed. You said, because when it matters most, I want to be the best person in the room. One of them, the one who'd been on the detail in Washington on March 30th, 1981, the day Reagan was shot outside the Hilton, gave the smallest nod you've ever seen. That was enough. Training lasts 6 months. It takes place at a federal facility in Maryland that most Americans have never heard of and never will. And it isn't what you expect. The physical part you can prepare for. 5 miles before breakfast. Shooting drills until your arms stop working and then shooting more. Close quarters combat. Defensive driving at speeds that would get you arrested on any public road. You train to fight with your weak hand because your strong hand might be occupied pushing a protectee behind a wall. You train to keep moving after taking damage because in a real attack, stopping is dying. But the part that stays with you isn't physical. It's the history. You study every assassination attempt on an American president, successful, failed, and intercepted before it ever became a headline. You stand in the places where it went wrong. You look out the window in Dallas, where a man with a bolt-action rifle changed the trajectory of American history, and you reconstruct every decision that allowed him to be there. You watch footage frame by frame, the kind of footage that burns itself into you until the mechanics of violence become something you understand at a cellular level, not just an intellectual one. You learn that John Hinckley fired 6 rounds in under 2 seconds on a March afternoon in 1981. You learn exactly how many of those rounds found targets and why, and what the agents on that detail did right, and what they'd do differently today. You learn that the difference between a successful attack and a failed one is almost never dramatic. It's usually one small decision made weeks earlier, a door left unlocked, a route not fully swept, a name that slipped through a background check. Small decisions, permanent consequences. That is what they are teaching you. Not to react faster, to make better decisions before the moment arrives. So, the moment never does. The Presidential Protective Division, PPD. Inside the service, there is no higher operational assignment. You don't apply. You're selected. And the day you get the call, you understand for the first time what the last 8 years of your career were actually building toward. Your role on the advance team means you arrive in a city before the president does. Sometimes days before. Sometimes a week. You walk every square foot of every venue he will enter. You identify every rooftop with a sightline to his route, every vehicle entrance, every loading dock and service corridor and stairwell that isn't on the public map. You visit local hospitals and establish protocols for a wounded protectee, something you hope you never need, something you plan for as though you're certain you will. The motorcade is a machine, and every piece of it has a purpose. The presidential vehicle, what agents call the Beast, is not a car in any conventional sense. It is a mobile fortress with armor in the doors, oxygen reserves in case of a chemical event, and medical supplies calibrated to the specific protectee inside. The vehicles around it are not escorts. They are layers. Each one is positioned and crewed to absorb or intercept a threat before it reaches the center. Counter-sniper teams sit on rooftops with precision rifles and the patience to hold a position for hours without movement. Counter-assault units stage nearby with heavier firepower ready for a coordinated attack. Communications, medical, and logistics run in parallel threads that all report to one person who is responsible for everything holding together. And inside all of it, you are the layer closest to the person whose life you have been entrusted to protect. You are not carrying a weapon because it makes you feel powerful. You are carrying it because the distance between a threat and your protectee is, in a worst case, the length of your arm. Paranoia is not a weakness in this work. It is a professional standard. You verify what has been verified. You check what has been checked. You walk routes that have already been walked, not because you distrust your colleagues, because you understand that no single human being catches everything. And in this job, everything must be caught. You develop something over years on the rope line that veteran agents call the tingle. It sounds like intuition. It isn't. It's your brain running thousands of behavioral calculations below the level of conscious thought and flagging an anomaly before you can articulate what triggered it. A crowd at a presidential event has a specific emotional texture. People are excited. They reach out. They hold up phones. They crane their necks. They react to the person in front of them. The ones who concern you are the ones who don't match that texture. The ones who are completely still while everyone else moves. The ones whose attention isn't on the president but on something else. The security perimeter, the vehicle, the sight lines. When the tingle fires, you don't wait to confirm it. You move toward the source. You intercept. You engage. If you're wrong, you apologize. And you reset. Nobody has ever been disciplined for being too alert. The inverse is not true. The service investigates thousands of threats annually. The overwhelming majority are noise, people in crisis, people venting, people who lack the capability or genuine intent to follow through. But some are real, and the only way to know which is to take every single one seriously, investigate every single one thoroughly, and trust the system that has been built over decades to filter signal from static. If this is the kind of content you find yourself actually learning from, a like and a subscribe genuinely helps me keep making it. Thanks. You've imagined it 1,000 times. The way time compresses when something real begins. The way your heart rate climbs past the point where fine motor control starts to degrade and your training has to carry you because conscious thought is already too slow. You've studied the footage from every major incident, not to understand the attackers, but to understand the agents, what they did, where they were, the fractions of a second between a decision and its consequence. At a campaign event in the Northeast, a man cleared the security perimeter and was moving toward the stage. You were the first to move. You closed the distance in roughly 3 seconds. He was unarmed, a protester who wanted to make a statement, but you didn't know that, and you couldn't afford to wait until you did. You brought him down with enough force to leave him with cracked ribs. You felt something about that afterward. Not regret. More like an acknowledgement that the job sometimes costs people who weren't the threat something real, because you cannot afford to find out too late. Another time, an advanced sweep of a Philadelphia neighborhood turned up a rifle in an apartment overlooking the primary route. Legal weapon, legal owner. A hunter who'd left his rifle near a window while he repaired a scope. The motorcade took the alternate route. The public never knew. That's the job working exactly as it should. The victories are invisible. Only the failures make noise. You have spent your career ensuring that there is no noise. Your last day on the detail is not what you expected it to be. There's no dramatic moment, no speech at the rope line. You stand your post the same way. You've stood it for the better part of 2 decades. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, eyes moving in a steady sweep that by now requires no more conscious effort than breathing. Someone takes a picture. You don't notice until later. You hand in your credentials at the end of the shift. The woman at the desk has processed hundreds of these. She says, "Congratulations." You say, "Thank you." You walk to your car and you sit in it for a few minutes before starting the engine, and you feel something you can't quite name. Not grief, not relief, something in between, something that doesn't have a clean word for it. On the drive home, a car cuts you off on the interstate and your hand moves before you've consciously registered anything. Force of habit, threat assessment running on a loop even now, even today, even after you've just closed the door on the only professional identity you've had for the last 19 years. You think about what your colleague said at that steakhouse all those years ago. You think about the flask, the courtroom, the daughter who grew up while her father was standing between a president and the world. You think about what you've actually seen in those 19 years. Not the version that makes it into the history books, not the motorcades and the press conferences and the state dinners. The version that doesn't get written down. The man in the Philadelphia apartment with his deer rifle by the window. The protester in New Hampshire who wanted to make a statement and ended up with cracked ribs because you couldn't afford to find out his intentions slowly. The thousands of shifts where nothing happened, where the whole invisible machine ran perfectly, and the only record of it was the absence of any record at all. There are names on a memorial wall at headquarters, agents who didn't make the drive home. You've stood in front of that wall. You've run your fingers across letters cut into stone. You're not one of those names. You made it out whole, more or less. That is not nothing. When you get home, your spouse is in the kitchen. There's food on the stove. The house smells like something you haven't smelled in 3 weeks because you've been in hotels that smell like recycled air and tension. Your spouse turns around and looks at you and doesn't say anything for a second. They know what today was. They've known what today was for months, maybe longer. They ask if you're okay. You say yes, and for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time since you can remember, you think you might actually mean it. You'll still sit with your back to the wall in restaurants. You'll still clock the exits. You'll still notice the person in a crowd who doesn't fit the emotional temperature of the room. And some part of you will always want to move toward them, to close the distance, to put yourself between the wrongness and whatever it's moving toward. That particular wiring doesn't come out. You've accepted that, but tonight, you eat dinner at your own table. You ask your spouse about their week, and you actually listen to the whole answer. Later, you sit in a quiet house and you think about that retirement party, about the shadow box on the wall, about a little girl who knew her father loved her and also knew he was almost never there. And you think about what you would have done differently and what you couldn't have done differently, and where the line between those two things actually sits. You don't reach a verdict. Maybe that's fine. Maybe the honest accounting of a life like this isn't a verdict at all. It's just the sum of what you chose and what those choices cost, and the knowledge that on a particular Tuesday in Philadelphia, and on a particular afternoon in New Hampshire, and on 1,000 other days that nobody will ever write about, you were exactly where you needed to be. That's the job. That was always the job. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Comment down below what you would like to see next.